My report is on the importance of the Second Amendment and the fundamental flaws behind gun control. The Second Amendment gives citizens the ability to protect their life, liberty, and freedom. It also preserves the balance of power between a government and its citizens. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. No one knew this better than the Founding Fathers. After the colonies declared independence from religious persecution, atrocities, and unfair taxation without representation, the reality would soon hit home. They would have to fight for their freedom. The colonists spent 7 years fighting superior British numbers and firepower, with small arms and passion. The unlikely victory over the British was the birth of the United States. When the Founding Fathers sat down and debated our Constitution, they knew that personal freedoms and repression from government had to be protected. They had just paid in blood for these rights, so naturally the first 10 amendments written by James Madison are called the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, covering what they had just fought for, it states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The second, giving the ability to protect those rights. It states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It is no mistake that the right to bear arms was put second, and not fourth or fifth. The Founding Fathers knew it was needed. Some infamous people have supported gun control. Leaders like Hitler, Pol Pot, and Stalin have combined to murder tens of millions. Or present-day leaders like Bashir al-Assad and Muammar Gaddafi, who does and did advocate gun control. These advocates of gun control say a lot about the subject, but being a constitutional right in the United States, the battle ends up taking place in the courts. The Supreme Court is the law of the land regarding the Constitution and its amendments, though the money needed for judicial fights comes from gun right and gun control groups. These organizations use media to sway public opinion, making it easier for lawmakers to write law. The way the public sways is usually how the law is written, so it is extremely important. There are 6 landmark cases that have shaped how the Second Amendment is regarded and the restrictions and regulations that are afforded to the states without infringing on that right. These cases are Cruikshank versus the United States, Presser versus Illinois, United States versus Miller, United States versus Lopez, Heller versus the District of Columbia, and McDonald versus Chicago. In 1876, the court heard Cruikshank versus the United States and stated that due process and equal protection clauses in the Constitution applied only to state action and not to the action of individuals. In 1887, the court heard Presser versus Illinois. Herman Presser rode into the middle of Chicago with 300 armed men on horseback. He was arrested and fined for not having a permit. The court stated, we think it is clear that the sections under consideration, which only forbid bodies of men associated together as military organizations, or to drill or parade with arms in cities and towns unless authorized by law, do not infringe on the right of the people to keep and bear arms. These 2 cases were stated as precedents for over 121 years. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, stricter laws were passed, and the court heard the 1939 case of United States versus Miller, allowing the states to clamp down even harder by banning certain types of weapons, most notably machine guns and sawed-off shotguns. The high watermark for gun control advocates was the passage of the 1994 Violent Crime and Law Enforcement Act, otherwise known as the assault weapons ban. The passage of this law was seen as going too far for many, and they began donating to gun right groups like the National Rifleman Association. It was also key in the 1994 Republican Revolution, in which the Democrats lost 54 seats in the House and 8 seats in the Senate. Politicians have since been wary to take on gun rights groups, and in 2004, the assault weapons ban was not renewed. A recent poll on April 14, 2012 by Reuters showed that 55% of Democrats and 82% of Republicans support the NRA, making them a very powerful lobbying group. A breakthrough came in the 1997 case of United States versus Lopez. The court overturned the 1990 School Zone Act, making it illegal to have a weapon in a school zone. It was the first time the court had overturned legislation under Congress's Commerce Clause. The court said federal firearm laws have nothing to do with commerce. Still, in 200 years, the Supreme Court had not heard a case on the right of an individual to bear arms. That changed in 2008 when the court heard Heller versus District of Columbia. D.C. had a no handgun policy that was challenged to be unconstitutional. The court ruled on behalf of Heller, stating that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia, and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within a home. The most important words for gun right groups since the inception of the Bill of Rights: an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia. In 2010, the court heard McDonald v. Chicago. Chicago also had a ban on handguns, stating the Cruikshank and Presser decisions as precedents. It was thrown out with Associate Justice Samuel Alito stating Heller as precedents. The court has shown brilliant restraint and reluctance in carrying a weapon outside the home. They declined to hear Williams v. Maryland in 2010, a case which involved carrying a weapon without a concealed weapons permit. Now that citizens in Chicago and Washington, D.C. could buy handguns and other weapons, did it dramatically increase crime like gun control advocates said it would? The simple answer is no. Crime went down dramatically, not up. In Washington, D.C., homicides went down 42%, sexual assaults down 15%, robberies with a gun down 58%, and violent crimes down 31%. From 2010 to 2011, in Chicago, homicide went down 14%, robbery down 3.1%, aggravated assault down 13%, theft down 8%, and total violent crime down 8.8%. The only major increase was auto theft. Thieves didn't want to go into homes anymore. They would rather steal a car while someone is asleep. The stats show that legal gun ownership by law-abiding citizens within their community can reduce crime. Communities are one thing, but in extreme cases, the Second Amendment could protect your life against unjust governments. The Founding Fathers knew this better than anyone. Here are some examples of how populations respond when their freedoms are taken away and they decide to fight back. In Syria, gun control advocate Bashir al-Assad has been murdering his own people. After Russia and China vetoed a UN resolution to stop violence and have elections, Assad started shelling cities like Homs with tanks, artillery, and mortar shells. The people are unarmed and are begging for help. Families lined up in their homes and shot point blank in the head. The Second Amendment gives you the chance to defend yourself. It might be futile against tanks, but at least you can go out fighting. In Libya, the situation was different. Gun control advocate Muammar Gaddafi ruled merciless for 30 years until the people decided to revolt. The first thing the population did was raid weapon depots, like the one in the Fusa Mountains. This gave them an opportunity to fight back. Luckily, Libya is an oil-rich country, giving it importance to countries in Europe belonging to NATO. NATO airstrikes on armor and the decimation of Gaddafi's air force allowed rebels to fight a war of attrition, accumulating in the death of Gaddafi 7 months after the civil war started. NATO air power would have not mattered without the weapons they got at the depots to fight on the ground. Gaddafi followed the path of many brutal men. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Although the Second Amendment exists with facts that support it, certain groups, media, lobbyists, and politicians seem to stop at nothing to promote gun control. 2 recent cases show examples of this: the 2010 Gabby Gifford Tucson shooting and the more recent George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin shooting. Before the judicial process could work or any of the facts in the Zimmerman-Martin shooting were released, you heard Al Sharpton yelling murder, congressmen wearing hoodies in the House, Black Panthers putting out bounties, misleading photos, and NBC deliberately changing transcripts. Right behind the racist banter was cries for harsher laws. They stated Florida's Stand Your Ground law, along with racist profiling, was behind the shooting. 24 hours into the Gabrielle Gifford shooting, they were talking about gun control laws, political banter, and right-wing extremists. The debate should be if what they did was legal or not. We all have the right to own a gun, as the Supreme Court has stated. We don't have the right to use that gun illegally. A debate on how these instances can be avoided while respecting the Second Amendment would be more appropriate. Even more sinister is how far the left-leaning Department of Justice will go. In a recent program called Fast and Furious run by the ATF, operations that resulted in 2,800 guns being brought into Mexico through Arizona. Gun owners were forced by the ATF to sell guns that were going to drug cartels. In 2010, ATF agent Brian Terry was murdered, and one of the guns was tracked to Fast and Furious. Numerous ATF agents and whistleblowers uncovered the operation. Emails indicated that the DOJ, or Department of Justice, knew about the operation, and Attorney General Eric Holder had committed perjury before the House Oversight Committee, run by Representative Darrell Issa. Holder quickly retracted his testimony and said that he had made a mistake on the timeline. Gun right groups believed that when people started getting murdered in Mexico with these guns, the DOJ would make a case for stricter gun control on border states like Arizona, Nevada, and Texas. They had no one following the guns and no GPS devices attached. On May 3, 2012, the House Oversight Committee began the process of holding the Attorney General in contempt of Congress if he does not release the requested documents. We will see how this turns out. Whether it's reduction in crime, defense of one's life, liberty, and freedoms, or resistance against unjust government or tyrannical dictators, the Second Amendment is an essential fabric within free societies. People in the civilized world, and especially people in the United States, can't comprehend a collapse within society or a situation where they would need protection against its own government. The Founding Fathers knew better, and that is why they gave Americans the right to keep and bear arms. It is our right and we must exercise it. Quoting former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes, if a man neglects to enforce his rights, he cannot complain if, after a while, the law follows his example. This has been the Second Amendment, presented by me, Brennan Belinsky. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.